Okay, what's up, freshies? Welcome to our first ever lecture, Food Science and Technology as a Discipline, Part 1. So as you can see, I'm wearing a lab gown and my hair cap for added credibility because that's what most people do for credibility. They wear lab gowns to prove that they are scientists. Kidding aside, this is the uniform that I usually wear when I'm teaching laboratory classes, although I'm not wearing a mask because then the sound would be garbled and you're already used to seeing people wearing masks. Okay, so let's get things started. Okay, tinanggal ko na yung hair cap kasi baka tagaktak pawis na ako dito later. So you may ask, what is the definition of food science? What the heck is this course that I'm taking? Whether or not you chose it willful knowledge of what it entails, or you just blindly shot a dart at a dartboard with course names dotted along um, the board. Okay, so I'll have two definitions here. The first is from the Institute of Food Technologists, or IFT, discipline in which biology, physical sciences, and engineering are used to study the nature of foods, the causes of their deterioration, and the principles underlying food processing. So in this definition, we can see, of course, that the focus is on the food itself, and therefore you want to study the different facets of the study of food. And the focus as well is first and foremost deterioration and prevention of that deterioration, which we could likely call food preservation. And the next part is on food processing, which includes the sensory properties of food, the safety aspect, the costing aspect, the technology aspect of it all. The next definition is from IFST, as quoted by one of our resource books. It's defined as a coherent and systematic body of knowledge and understanding of the nature and composition of food materials and their behavior under various conditions to which they may be subject. So it's actually just a paraphrasing of the first definition in terms of highlighting the nature of foods. However, in this case, there's a highlight as well on understanding the composition, how, let's say, water, protein, and fats interact with each other, and how increasing the amount of one substance would affect the overall properties of that food substance. And of course, their behavior under various conditions is related as well to processing. So if you look at your course, it says there food technology. However, it is found in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition. So we could therefore assume that we make a distinction between what food science is and what food technology is. And suffice to say, um, food technology is under food science, and the keyword here is application. So IFT defines food technology as the application of food science to the selection, preservation, processing, packaging, distribution, and use of safe, nutritious, and wholesome foods. So therefore, when you study BS in food technology, you are focused mainly on the application of what you're learning to the end products and the other processes surrounding them, as well as during distribution, such as, say, when well, I used to work in the ice cream industry, and getting your ice cream from our plant in Laguna to the warehouse in Bicol is a distribution problem, because you have to make sure that it does not deteriorate as much in transit, and in fact it does a little bit. All right. And this is also the reason why, despite food technology being the name of the bachelor's course, usually the master's and PhD courses are called food science. Because in food tech, you study the basics of applying it to food, and in food science, you study the reasons as to why things occur. Like, for example, um, why do why does bread stale over time? And therefore, food science will answer that question, and food technology will focus on how do I prevent that bread staling over time. This definition, on the other hand, is based on the Commission of Higher Education Memorandum Order 07, Series of 2019, and I'll read it to you. Food technology is a discipline based on the application of science and related fields of study in the conversion of raw materials into safe, stable, palatable, and nutritious foods. It includes post-harvest handling, preparation, processing, packaging, storage, and distribution of food to ensure food security and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. It also includes the social, cultural, economic, managerial, and entrepreneurial and environmental aspects of food systems, as well as the art of food preparation. So this may be one of the most comprehensive definitions we've seen to date. This was improved upon from the CMO 2006 version. There were some additions, in particular the term art of food preparation and including the entrepreneurial aspects of food. So as you can see here in the CMO version, we highlight not just the coverage, safety, palatability, and nutrition, and even coverage in terms of what we call the farm to fork, from post-harvest handling to prior to consumption, but the intention as well is for the food for the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. And it also looks at the different aspects. So food technology studies social science in a way, because we look at, for example, sensory evaluation and what makes people tick. You make a product that people would want, and you would want to know what products they would want. For example, the Filipino taste. How is it different from, say, the American taste or maybe the Chinese taste? So that's part of the cultural aspect as well. And then we also want to groom food technologists into entrepreneurs that can turn their ideas into reality and sell their own products, so that we could bolster the economy by launching micro, small, and medium scale entrepreneurs. Lastly, we also added the art of food preparation, because we acknowledge that although food technology is a branch of food science, there is also an artistic aspect to it, or we want to turn our science into something that would be pleasing to the eye for most people, so to speak. Right, so by now, maybe you're asking why are there so many different definitions? Well, we of course work um, as educators under different context. So we have the international context, hence you have IFT. We have the local educational context, hence you have CHED. And of course, recently, this law, which we've been trying to lobby for decades, has actually been approved last 2018. It's the Philippine Food Technology Act. So I suggest you study this on your own, although you will encounter it a few times in your 4 years or more of stay in UP. So let me read first. In this Act, Republic Act 11052, it says there that the state recognizes the importance of professional food technologists in nation building and development, and thus this is the act which allows for the professionalization of BSFT, or food technology as a profession, wherein we will actually get a board exam and license. Although to date, the implementing rules and regulations are not yet there, so there is not yet any board exam for us. But hopefully, cross his fingers, by the time you graduate, there would be a board exam for food technology. This is because in the industry, sometimes our job has been given to chemists, microbiologists, and maybe chemical engineers who may not have studied the other parts of food technology or food science that is relevant to the overall conduct of our job. So, for example, a chemist may know about the chemical properties of food, sometimes more than we do, but they know very little about the microbiological properties of food or the danger of microorganisms, for example. or they may not know anything about sensory evaluation of food and how to make food palatable to the consumers through consumer testing. All right. So again, the definition stated in the RA is that food technology refers to the application of the physical, biological, and behavioral sciences to the conversion of raw materials into safe, palatable, stable, palatable, and nutritious foods. It includes the process of handling, storage, processing, packaging, distribution, and utilization of food. So again, it's just to state the coverage from farm to fork, and also um, the goal, which is conversion of raw materials into safe, stable, and palatable and nutritious foods, which differentiates us from agriculture, which normally ends at the harvest of the raw materials, or rather their harvest and storage. And of course, we add here that we apply not just physical and biological sciences, but also behavioral sciences. So in a way, understanding consumer behavior is a behavioral science with some psychological aspects involved. So you've heard me mention the term farm to fork a few times in the previous slides, and based on the definitions of food technology or food science I've read out to you, you probably have an idea what it means. So usually ginagamit ito ng mga food technologists para i-delineate yung line of work nila from other professionals. So essentially, what you mean is that we're different from agriculture in the sense na we don't really uh, emphasize yung pag-study ng how crops grow or yung like things like animal nutrition, animal livestock for food consumption, but rather we pick up where they left off, no? So kapag na-harvest na yung produce or na-slaughter na yung animal, anything that happens to those raw materials up unto their conversion into finished products in the food supply chain and their transport into the retail operations up until the point of consumption. So atin yun, saklaw po ng food tech yun. Kapag naman po ang isang pagkain ay pumasok na sa katawan ng consumer, then yun po ay saklaw na ng nutrition. Pero syempre, kung halimbawa na food poisoning yung consumer because of the food they ate, then we have to look at the food technologist's expertise to backtrack where along the line the contamination or the food poisoning ingredient could have occurred or have been introduced into the food, no? So essentially, this is what we call the food supply chain. So I have worked before in Magnolia Ice Cream, and bilang mga quality assurance all-rounders po kami, no? We do everything from auditing the supplier. So for example, we had the supplier for milk na prospective. We visited their place, looked at their plant, and assessed kung ano yung operational capabilities nila since they will be providing us with raw materials that have certain properties. We also look at the supply chain. No? Meron kaming tinatawag na mga um, audit ng truck. So if we were gonna hire a new subcontractor to, let's say, have their refrigerated vans transport our ice cream from one warehouse to another or to retail markets, then we have to inspect them. And we also do what we call yung trundling test. No? Halimbawa, isasakay mo yung ice cream from Santa Rosa to Bicol, maglalagay kami doon ng temperature monitoring device, and then we look at the temperature fluctuations as the product is being transported. And we even go all the way as to, at that time, kapag merong tumawag dun sa hotline number nung San Miguel for a Magnolia ice cream product complaint, the call center would forward that complaint to us, and we will be the ones to interact with the customers in person and even do product retrieval. So I had some adventures no wherein pupunta ako sa kung saan saang lugar to meet up with the customer, retrieve their ice cream product, replace them with a new one, and then explain to them the positive and negative sides of well, what could have went wrong halimbawa, or if it was somehow a fault of theirs, what they could have done to prevent it from occurring again. No? So anyway, yun. So when we say farm to fork, it's from where agriculture left off Two, before nutritionists take over as your consumers eat the food. So food technology as a discipline has not technically been around formally since the Stone Ages. And you might wonder, di ba pwedeng ubusin na lang natin yung pagkain natin? Tapos, para saan ba talaga yung food tech na yan? Well, as you can see in this figure, we have here on the x-axis yung different continents or categories ng mga clusters of countries and the per capita food losses and waste per year in kilograms. Now, per capita meaning each person loses this amount of food per year. No? And there are two categories here, sa consumer end and sa production end. So if this is around, as you can see here, anywhere from somewhere around 130 kilograms per person per year sa South and Southeast Asia, kasi madalas tayong sinasabihan finish our food. Two, as you look at the more industrialized countries, almost close to 300 kilograms per year, so almost double netong sa Asia, no, yung North America. And as you can see, kapag parang mas first world country, mas developed country siya, mas lumalaki yung consumer waste na proportion, no? So, although there is a significant amount for all cases, mas marami yung nawawala between production to retailing. So, yan yung mga napapanood nyo sa balita, yung mga kamatis na tinatapon na lang sa tabing daan kasi hindi maibenta, or nabulok na lang for some reason, nag-rot sa warehouse, blah blah blah. Okay, and these red ones are typically yung bumili ka ng saging tapos nagkamagots na yung saging mo, nakalimutan mo kainin, or may ulam na ayaw mo na pala, tinapon mo na lang, or so on, or maarte ka yung pizza crust hindi mo kinakain diretso sa trash can. So yan yung red part. So ano ang kinalaman ng food technologists dito? So before we answer that question, let us look at our food facts and figures. Okay, the total fraction of food that gets wasted every year. So nagsimula ka sa production pero hindi siya umabot sa consumption is around 1/3 or 1.3 billion tons. No? Put it simply, if you were to lower that to zero, then we could feed 50% more people with our current feeding habits or situations. No? It is estimated that halos $1 trillion US dollars yung approximate cost nitong food waste na ito. Okay? And mas malaking part dito yung sa industrialized countries because they also produce and consume more and throw away more food in general. Okay? Almost half of that 1/3 food losses is fruits and vegetables, roots, and tubers. So, ibig sabihin po, alam naman natin na yung mga meats and fishes, halimbawa, i-freeze mo lang sila, medyo okay na. Pero yung fruits and vegetables, they really are perishable, and that's why it's the hardest, no? Minsan nga kasi yung mga, halimbawa, yung baka, yung isda, pwede mo namang hindi pa i-harvest or patayin, di ba? Para hindi sila mag-spoil. Pero yung mga fruits and vegetables, if it's time to pick them, then it's time to pick them. And that's where food processing comes in. If you're able to process these agricultural produce, then you can reasonably extend their shelf life. Now, simply turning, for example, wheat into flour would extend that product's usefulness by months or years. Okay? Or pag nag-harvest ka ng palay, tas ginawa mong bigas, you can store rice under the right conditions for years even. Okay, next is 222 million tons of the amount of food lost in industrialized countries. So how much is that? It's equal to the net food production of the whole sub-Saharan Africa. So if you're able to save even a fraction of this, you can feed a lot more people. Hopefully prices will go down, costs will go down as well for the consumer. So it is estimated that the per capita consumer waste in Europe, in North America, is hovering between 95 to 115 kilograms compared to only 6 to 11 kilograms a year in other nations such as Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, kasama tayo doon, which is less than a tenth of what the Europeans and Americans throw away. No, kumbaga sa kanila, may konting blemish lang, tapon na. Sa atin, nahulog na sa sahig, wala pang 5 minutes, pwede pa yan, di ba? Ganun tayong mindset natin. Tsaka, pinapalaki tayo parate, di ba, na finish your food kasi kawawa naman yung mga tao sa Africa or something along those lines, right? Alright, all in all, if we were able to eliminate this food waste or turn them into something that ends up being eaten, we could feed an additional 3.48 billion people. Okay, it's pretty much close to half the population of the planet, right? And if we look at the per capita food production in developed versus developing countries, the ratio is almost twice, 900 kilograms per year versus 460 kilograms per year. Now, this means that technically may surplus yung developing countries kasi if you divide that, then that's almost 3 kilograms per person per day. Ikaw ba nakakakain ka ng halos 3 kilong worth ng pagkain sa isang araw? Syempre hindi, di ba? So, ano nga ang kinalaman ng food tech dito? Well, we exist to essentially minimize this amount of food waste through our knowledge and skills in food processing and food safety and the likes. At least that's one way to frame our purpose in the world. So we saw in the figures earlier that depending on whether you're a developing or developed country, kung saan ang gagaling yung losses mo. Okay? In developing countries, post-harvest and processing has around 40% losses, while in the industrial countries, 40% happens at the retail and consumer level. So in this case, pwede nating sabihin na dun sa industrialized or developed countries, na-address na nila through food processing and all, yung part ng food losses sa agricultural or production side. Pero syempre, kailangan lang namang i-deal with yung consumer attitudes, no? Of course, we play a part in that is if we design foods in such a way that would encourage their consumption, then this would be lowered as well. Alright? So, isa sa mga problems dito, of course, is yung tinatawag ng iba na ugly produce. Okay? Yung mga perfectly edible pa naman, pero medyo may blemish, yung saging na may itim-itim na, yung lettuce leaves na medyo wilted na, and all that. So, parang, ay, hindi na pasado sa akin yan, hindi ko nakakainin yan. Okay? And food loss and waste country is, of course, these are the sources. So, pwede yung masabi pag natapon natin yung pagkain, hindi siya nabenta, hindi siya nakain, tinatapon din natin yung resources required to make it, which is water, the use of that land for that period of time required to grow it, energy, and even the labor. So, it is ironic that in pretty much all nations across the globe, farmers who produce our food and allow us to survive even during the pandemic usually bear a brunt of these losses and usually have very marginal profits, no? Kahit nabapunta ka sa US, ang mga farmers doon, they're sometimes some of the poorest in the population. You go to Indonesia, it's the same thing. I think very few countries really do value their farmers, and probably I think that's one way of saying na ang isang bansa na maganda ang pagtrato sa kanilang mga farmers ay isang napaka gandang bansa, no? And of course, all of these wastage does contribute to global warming and climate change with the CO2 production involved in the rising global temperatures. Okay, so we need to consume less and produce less, waste less, no? So on the other hand, in developing countries such as ours, food waste and losses occur mainly at the early stages of the food supply chain. And these, of course, are related to financial, managerial, and technical constraints in harvesting techniques. So lack of technologies maybe for optimal storage of agricultural produce, maybe lack of knowledge as well. And when it comes to optimization of storage, for example, did you know that bananas are very sensitive to storage temperature? Merong lang plus minus 2 degrees siguro that would allow them to be transported for more than a few weeks. Ay ikaw pag bumili ka ng saging, iiwan mo lang yan sa kusina. Kung medyo warm yung temperature like summertime, in as little as 2 or 3 days, yung medyo green-green pa na banana mo, overripe na at malamang tinutubuan na ng maggots, no? Pero if we were able to store these bananas at the optimal temperature somewhere around 11 degrees Celsius, then they could last for weeks or even longer than a month. Okay? But sadly, we don't really have that. No? Pero sa export ng mga saging ng Pilipinas, may ganon. They really control pinpoint accuracy yung temperature ng bananas natin. Okay, that's just an example now. So we will need to strengthen the food supply chain through supporting our farmers. There are some support from DA, of course, that's happening, maybe not enough. And of course, yung geography ng ating bansa is not really conducive to agriculture in compared to other countries is another issue. Right? But farm to market roads, no? Kasi yung something as simple as hindi na bubugbog sa tagtag sa biyahe ng poor road conditions and poor suspension ng trucks, malaking bagay yun to extend the shelf life of food and could spell the difference between spoiling a few hundred kilograms of produce from between the pickup point to the drop-off. Okay? And of course, in terms of processing and packaging, meron tayong mga minimally processed foods sa tinatawag. A little packaging could go a long way, no, to preserve food. Although, syempre, food waste din ito. So, we want that packaging to be recoverable, recyclable, or reusable para less yung environmental impact. Alright, so again, as I mentioned, in medium and high income countries, typically marami na naman silang na-solve at the early stages. However, when it comes to consumer behavior and practically throwing away your food at the, di ba, when in doubt, throw it out, tapos very doubtful sila, kaya ang daming tinatapon. So, kaya kailangan din nating aralin yung psychology part or behavioral science part ng food science. Kasi to be able to reduce the impacts of consumer eating behavior and throwing away of food behavior, we need to know how they think, how we think as consumers. Essentially, it's also a problem between a coordination problem between other actors in the food supply chain, no? So whether that be yung difference ng supply versus demand, yung mga nagaganap between farmers and buyers and middlemen, etc. And essentially, we also need to raise the awareness that even though they are medium and high income countries, these are the problems and these are the things they could do as individuals or institutions to lessen the amount of food waste. So nandyan halimbawa yung ginagawa ng ibang governments like I think in France where they have a law na kung meron ka ng agricultural produce na malapit ng mag-spoil ay kailangan mo itong i-donate sa let's say charitable institution so that they can make use of it as food rather than throwing away perfectly good food that could have been eaten by the others. Na kumbaga, kung hindi mo na rin lang siya mabebenta, huwag ka naman magpakasakim at itapon sa parang hindi mapakinabangan ng iba. Hayaan mo na mapakinabangan siya. Hindi ka na naman kikita dun eh. No? Do the hungry people a favor and the world a favor. No? So as an overview, let's look at the losses per commodity. So 30% of cereals are lost and 20% of dairy. So globally, that accounts for 763 billion boxes of pasta. I don't know how you convert that in terms of sacks of rice, no, para sa ating mga Pinoy. And for dairy, the equivalent is 574 billion eggs. All right, so as you can see here, for cereals, most of the losses are in consumption for developed countries. Okay, and then mostly agriculture side for developing countries. For dairy, medyo ganun din, although of significant note, especially for developing countries in distribution. This could be probably attributed to, let's say, hindi kasi napapasteurize or napaprocess, thermally process yung milk nila. Raw milk spoils much faster than, let's say, the typical milk that you buy in Tetra Paks and so on. So for aquatic and plant produce, the losses are 35% and 45% respectively. Again, as you can see in industrialized nations, it's mostly sa consumption part. Tayo nilang kainin yung isda or whatever, tatapon na, nagsawa na. Very curious ako sa North America, no, but sobrang laki nito. Okay. And as usual, curiously for developing countries like ours, it's mostly in the distribution since minsan 'di ba nasa palengke ka ni hindi man nga lang nakayelo yung mga isda or something or nakayelo man pero hindi naman talaga yung temperature controlled, so they have to throw it away even before it gets sold sometimes. Okay, that's equivalent to 3 billion Atlantic salmons, and for the food losses, about 3.7 trillion apples worth of food. So notice that this was a very Western infographic, no? Kasi napaka-Western, salmons and apples. Anyway, of course, at 45%, as you can see here, even in developed countries, malaki pa rin ang losses sa agriculture. Dahil talagang perishability issue yan, along with supply and demand. Pero malaki din yung role ng consumption. For the developing countries, most of the losses happen during processing. So, hindi ko masabi kung bakit maybe may some sort of sorting or along the way, depende sa type ng process na pinagdadaanan, binabawasan nila yung ibang edible portion na na-damage ng insects maybe. Much in the same way, di ba minsan, ako na lang, bibili ko ng talong, 4 na piraso, after kong ma-roast ito over the stove top para gawing ensalada, paghihiwain ko na, tsaka ko lang malalaman na yung isa pala dun sa 4 may bulok na, meron pang malaking worm dun sa loob, no? So, or some sort of insect na pahaba. Oh, wait, hindi siya insect kasi marami siyang paa. Anyway, yun, you get the point. So, okay. Mahirap talaga itong fruits and vegetables, and that's why it's a continuing challenge for us food scientists and technologists to do something about it. Thankfully for meats, oilseeds, and pulses, medyo mababa naman yung losses, thanks in fact to the nature of the food and the available technologies for their preservation. Pero malaki pa rin yung 20% ng meat, no? That's still 75 million cows. And for the olives, for example, there's enough to fill 11,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of olive oil. Okay, so as you can see, most of the losses are in terms of consumption din. Hindi siguro inuubos yung pagkain, tinatapon na lang. So Sub-Saharan Africa, napakalaki ng production losses. So maybe ano ito, no? Maybe namamatay sa plague. And for example, in our current situation, no, yung ASF, napakalaki ng global effect in terms of almost doubling the price of pork. So for pork lovers like me, medyo masakit, no? Anyway, I remember nung ako'y estudyante pa at bumibili kami ng meat for mga pakain namin sa org, 130 per kilo lang yung baboy, no? Those were the days. Anyway, for oilseeds and pulses, so these are plants extracted for their oils, and pulses and legumes. Essentially, hindi naman sila madaling masira kasi yung pulses konting drying lang, and then yung oil, once na process mo na siya, other than rancidity, they could store for quite a long amount of time, no? So as you can see, that 20% still happens to be mostly lost to the agriculture side. Pero yung food tech side, pwede natin control yung post-harvest hanggang consumption. So, pretty much ang oils masyado nakakain naman, no? Although yun nga, yung mga, I don't know, maybe ito yung sa developed countries, yung kids that won't eat their beans or something. All right. Of note then to look is the losses during processing. So since we're studying food processing, hopefully we could deal with that too in the future. Okay, lastly we have roots and tubers. The losses are pegged at around 45%. So yung ating mga patatas at kamote mostly. This accounts for around the equivalent of 1 billion bags of potato chips. So who doesn't like potato chips? All right, so um, example in North America and Oceania, ang losses ay 5.8 million, 5.8 million tons wasted at the consumption stage alone. So are these the crumbs, the potatoes, or yung mga left on the plates? I don't know. There are a lot of agricultural losses as well. So this is of course dependent on anong klaseng crop yun. And then maybe sometimes dahil namimili sila pag medyo ugly yung produce or unfit for their quality specifications and they don't use it. Generally sa developing countries, may malaki pa rin ang losses, no? Kasi maraming diseases yung mga kamote and whatnot natin, iba-ibang tubers, no? By the way, I do remember merong nagsasuggest noon na scientist na yung mga rice-eating countries daw dapat pinapalitan na ng kamote na lang yung kanilang staple food. No? Although we do view kamote as somewhat of a poorer man's staple na you'd rather eat rice than kamote for class purposes. Mas marami daw advantages yung kamote in terms of requiring less input for the output compared to rice, which is a very tedious process to make. No, bibilad mo pa yan pagka-harvest mo and all that, may dehaling ka pa and whatnot. Anyway, so yeah, let's end here for this part of the module. We have not even touched on the issue of hunger and malnutrition, but we will do so in the next portion of this major topic. So nakakalungkot ng isipin that man has been racing to reach space and to reach Mars, but hasn't even made significant strides to eliminate hunger from this planet. So yun, that's it for now, and I hope you have a nice day.